This project looks at the early motion pathway, that is the very first computations necessary for any system. These processes are image motion estimation, 3D motion estimation, and motion segmentation. We can find many algorithms in computer vision that provide solutions, and many models in the biological vision literature. In this project, we will study properties of the underlying computations employed by the human vision system to solve these processes. We are going to do this by experimenting with optical illusions. We will create algorithms, and especially neural network implementations that work properly under normal conditions, but for special patterns, known as illusions, produce the same erroneous prediction as the human perception. Of specific interest are computations with events. We would like to set up experiments that can provide evidence for the usefulness of a signal based on contrast. The computations for motion interpretation are as follows. We first have to establish some representation in the image or video, the so-called image motion or optical flow. So if we have two views of the same object, we need to find points in the two views that correspond to the same 3D world point, like for example a point on a leaf in the left and in the right image. The change from the first to the second image can be visualized with a vector. This is the so-called optic flow vector at that point. After we have computed this image motion representation, we then can compute the transformation between the views. We also call this ego motion or 3D motion. And we can also compute how objects are moving independently. And pulling out this differently moving object is called the motion segmentation problem. Finally, knowing the 3D motion and knowing the image motion, we can get the depth of the scene in view, its geometry and the shape of the objects. The different components, image motion, 3D motion, scene structure and discontinuities are not independent. We can argue from a computational point of view, simply because, for example, image motion is so difficult to compute accurately, we need already the discontinuities and we need to know also 3D motion to get it very accurately. There's also evidence from the neurosciences that in these areas of motion processing, there's feedback from higher areas to lower areas that is significant. We will also see this in the displays, the visual illusions we're going to study. It's never just image motion. We see usually a clear segmentation of some objects and sometimes also depth perception that emerges. There's also the issue of cue integration. 3D motion, geometry, segmentation are computed from dynamic cues and static cues. These dynamic cues are coming from changes in intensity and the event signal, the transient signal we are interested in. We would like to isolate these dynamic cues and understand their roles. At some level, they do interact with the static cues. These are contours, texture, shading, stereo, color, cues that you can compute from single images. Learning approaches early on capture these static cues, and that has problems with overfitting. But as you will see in some of these illusions, there seems to be a clear separation of not mixing them up too early. In the next few slides, I'm going to show you some optical illusions and discuss possible project ideas. The basic concept underlying all computational motion analysis is the image motion. in the computer vision literature referred to as optic flow. Please refer to the below paper to get some information if you need so. In the abstract sense, we are having two views of the same 3D object, and we are corresponding points in the first image and the second image that are belonging to the same 3D point. And the change, how this point moved from the first image to the second image, can be represented via a vector. This is what the optic flow in the abstract sense means. This video shows you how an optic flow field looks like. The arrows indicate how points move in the video from frame to frame. This is a pattern by the Japanese graphics artist Auchi and discovered as optical illusion by Lothar Spillmann. You may just freely look at the pattern and you will get the experience that the inset is moving relative to the outset. Alternatively, I may jiggle the display for you, in which the appearance seems to be stronger. We have developed a theory for explaining this illusion. We think the main reason is statistical bias, as will be explained next. Computing optical flow is a two-stage problem. In the first stage, we usually can only compute one component out of the two-dimensional optical flow. This is the component perpendicular to edges or normal to edges, thus the name normal flow. This is because in a very small neighborhood, which is like looking through a small aperture, there usually is only one dominant texture direction present. In order to compute optical flow, we then have to impose in a small neighborhood smoothness constraints. The very simplest constraint is to say that the flow is constant. So what we get then, that each normal flow provides a constrained line on which the actual optical flow can lie, and having multiple such measurements, like here 2 and the third one, all these constraints lines should intersect in a point, and this provides the optical flow. However, our estimates are not perfect. There is noise in the estimates. As a result, the constraint lines won't intersect in a point. We then use an estimator to find a solution. Using a least squares estimator, it will compute the point that is closest to all the constraint lines. However, this estimation is not the veridical. As it turns out, there's statistical bias. The idea for the bias is as follows. We solve an equation system of the form Ax is b. We solve for x. With noise, however, we have it in the form a plus delta a x plus b delta b. A least square solution can be written in closed form as ATA minus 1 ATB. And it's well known that the expected value of this solution is not the veridical. It consists of the true value plus the additional bias term. This bias depends on the matrix A prime T A prime, and that's basically the texture in a region. We can analyze this bias by looking at the eigenvalues of this matrix. In general, the optic flow is underestimated, so it's shorter than it should be, and there's more bias in the direction of fewer measurements. As a result, the optic flow is in the direction of the majority of gradients in a patch. So why is this the case? We will illustrate it with a 1D example. Let us assume the equation ax is b. The solution is simple, x is b over a. If we have few examples with symmetric noise, for example 3 equations, we could have ax is b, a plus delta x is b, and a minus delta x is b. The least square solution would be the sum over the ai divided by the sum over ai square. If we now plug in from above, we obtain an equation x with the numerator 3ab divided by 3a square plus 2 delta square, with this additional term 2 delta square. Thus, this x is smaller than b over a, showing the bias and the underestimation. So let us come back to the Auchi pattern, where you see an inner circle moving relative to its surround. In this pattern, the texture is made up of black and white tiles. In the inset, these tiles are vertical. Thus, we have many more measurements in the inset that are horizontal and fewer that are vertical. And it's the opposite on the outside, where the tiles are horizontally. As a result, there are many more normal flow measurements that are vertical than they are horizontal. As a result, the flow will be estimated differently in the inset and in the outset. For example, for a motion of 45 degrees up, the flow vectors are shown here for a simulation, tending to be more up in the outset and more horizontally in the inset. To fully explain the illusion, the motion is caused either by eye movements or jiggling of the paper, and this 3D motion is computed from the periphery. Then the inset has a relative residual motion, and this is what we see as independent movement. The bias is a general principle. It does not only apply to image motion, but also to the computation of other image features, points, lines, and also to the estimation of 3D quantities, like for example the estimation of slant in 3D displays. The website below explains this and also has references to papers. For example, it applies to the intersection of lines. We assume that our local edge detectors that are found in the early motion pathway provide noisy estimates. Now, if we want to compute the intersection of the long line, we intersect all these noisy edges, and the correct solution for an acute angle will not be at the correct intersection of the long lines, but somewhere inside the acute angle. And this can explain, for example, the Lukic pattern, where a circle on top of tilted lines appears to have a bump on the left side. This is because the intersection of the tilted lines with the circle is computed incorrectly. Now, if we fit to this incorrect intersection splines, we get this bumped circle as perceived. The bias is demonstrated by putting the Lukic pattern into motion. As the lines move from one side to the other, so does the appearance of the circle change, bumping either on the left side or on the right side. So, what can we do with such displays? For once, we can look into neural network implementations and see whether they actually give bias. Another idea would be to use such and other displays that we create to look into the estimation. Does the human vision system actually use least squares estimation? Or is it using some other estimator, for example, L1 estimation? The next illusion I'm going to discuss is the snake illusion by Kitaoka. In this very strong motion illusion, you see the circles rotating. The upper left circle is moving counterclockwise, the next clockwise, counterclockwise, and so on. Please observe, this illusion happens at the periphery. That is, when you look at the circle, for example, look at the upper left circle and fixate on it, you don't see movement. It happens at other locations. So we see the illusion depends on size or scale, as we say in the study of vision. To explain the illusion, I'm going to use another display, the pattern Tonguri by Kitaoka. The illusion is somehow weaker, but simpler. Here again, we have counterclockwise motion in the left upper pattern, and then a clockwise in the one next to it. This illusion and many other patterns have the same signal. If we look at the single element in the illusory signal, we see we have here white next to brown and green, or if we convert it to grayscale and take a slice, we have here light gray next to white, next to dark gray, next to black, next to gray. So if we look at the intensity profile, the white of intensity 1 has on one side the signal drop into 2/3 and on the other side drop into 1/3. And the black on the other side has the signal rising to 2/3 and rising to 1/3 on the sides. So what we see here, along the bar, we have some asymmetry in the signal. The illusion is explained in a paper that you can find at the bottom of the page. What we are going to use to discuss this illusion is an energy model or frequency model, for the simple reason that this allows us to scale the size of the filters. Also other models could be used as well. And we're only going to look at the 1D case in the explanation. So what we are having then here is that our one-dimensional flow U times omega x, the spatial frequency, is equal to minus omega d, from which we derive that the flow is the temporal frequency over the spatial frequency negative. So to illustrate this, as the signal moves in xt domain over time, our bar will take this shape in xt space, moving to the left and here moving to the right. The theory that we are proposing here is that this illusion is due to asymmetric time filtering, so-called causal filtering. That is, when we are computing the changes in space, the space derivative, we are using symmetric filters, like here, an approximation of a Gabor filter. However, in time, we cannot use a symmetric filter, and biological systems don't do. They use causal filtering. They use the signal from the past to the present, and the filter is designed that weighs more the present than the past. Now, the beautiful thing with spatiotemporal filters is that they can be separated. We can first do the space filtering and on top of it, the time filtering. Specifically in our simulation, we use the Gabor filter for spatial derivative and the so-called gamma filter for time derivative. Here these filters are showing in their complex domain with the real and imaginary part. Now let us look at our signal, the bar from the Donguri pattern, which drops on the one side by 1/3 and on the other side by 2/3. And let us apply filters of different size to this. If we apply a large Gabor filter, then the response will be one large response to the whole bar. If we apply a filter of higher frequency, we will get two responses. A lower response to the left edge and a higher response to the right edge. However, if we apply a filter that's about the size of the bar, we get something of a confusion. We get a small bump on the left, but it doesn't drop down completely, and then a right response on the right for the energy response to the Gabor filter. We can also look at the phase response to this signal for those interested in filter design. And we will see that while we get a linear phase response for the low and the high frequency, we do not get it for the critical frequency of 1, where the filter is about as large as the bar. We get here this bump. Now we apply to this spatially filtered signal the temporal filter. And we compare left motion and right motion. And it turns out we get different responses. Intuitively, this is the case because in the case of left motion, we have a temporal filter that has qualitatively the same shape like the spatial response, whereas in the right motion, the filter is flipped with respect to the shape. Here a simulation is shown. The implementation is done as follows. We first filter the signal with a spatial filter. The response curve of the energy is shown in blue. Then, at every point, we apply a range of temporal filters and we pick the one that gives the largest energy response. The energy response shown here is in red. So, and we see now on the green curve which one of the temporal filters was picked. So, while on the right we have here now temporal filters that are above 1, so there's an overestimation, then a short underestimation but with very low energy and going again up for the movement to the left. While for a movement on the right, we would have a large underestimation for a large part of the curve and then only a small region on the right side of the curve that would give you an overestimation. So if we average this out over the whole bar of the signal, we get an overestimation for the left and an underestimation for the right, explaining the different estimates. So we have shown that there's erroneous image motion estimation at some scale because the way the pattern is set up due to its bar-like structure. Now how does the whole illusion work? The image motion is caused by fixational eye movements. It has been shown these are the drifts. So you should know about eye movements. We move our eyes with saccades, large movements, about 2 to 3 per second, and then we fixate. And during these fixations, tiny eye movements happen. They are computed visually, it has also been shown. And we are not aware of them, so we account for them. We always have a stable percept. So we assume that we are computing the global movement of this drift movement, but then because of the erroneous image motion, there's residual motion. And the patterns are set up such that this residual motion always adds up and is in the right direction. So here, for example, for a simulation, we simulated random drift movements with horizontal and vertical movement, and assuming we have many of them and add them up, we get exactly the circular motion perceived. For a psychophysical experiment, we did the following. We took the original snake pattern and we sliced it at 3 different heights. At the middle, where it is the Donguri pattern, so we have a dark bar next to a yellow and a blue. Somewhere higher, where the yellow, the dark, the black, the white are all have equal size. And then on the top, where we have it inverted. So we have small yellow and large dark and white areas. And we created signals out of them in form of bars, like here the Donguri, the bar signal, and the step signal, as we call it. We wrapped this signal around circles. So we had 3 different signals. Here you see the Donguri, and we also created the mirror symmetric images. Now, different observers perceive the illusion with different strengths. Some see it very strong, others weaker, and others not at all. So with our display now, we could put the illusion in motion, so create a video that counter-rotates the movement. And the observer here on a dial could play and set the speed in the counter movement till the illusion came to a halt. This way we have a quantitative evaluation for how strong an individual perceives the strengths of the illusion. We can run our algorithm on the different signals for different frequencies and see the misestimation. And we see that the largest misestimation occurs around the critical frequency of 1. And the misestimation is largest for Donguri and then weaker for bars and steps. And then we can compare our prediction from the computation with what we measured from subjects. And it turns out that the relative strength is very well predicted by the model. The next displays show you some variations based on the same signal principle designed by Kitaoka. Here, strong movement of the different patterns of different size. And here's another pattern by Kitaoka called 3D waving pattern, exactly for the perception that you have, also based on the same signals. So now what can we do in our project? First of all, we can look at implementations in neural networks. What properties do we have to have in our networks so that we get causal filtering or to predict the illusions? We can look at classic networks and we can look at spiking networks, for example. A third kind of illusion is the stepping feet illusion. You see here a blue and yellow rectangle that are really in parallel. But as they move over the black and white grating, you have the perception as if they would be moving in steps. When the blue is over the black, it seems to lag behind. And similar when the yellow is over the white, giving this stepping effect. There exist explanations in the literature, and you can read about them on the website of Michael Buck, given at the bottom of the page. An important concept to know is that motion perception doesn't use color. It only uses intensity. And the blue is tuned such that its intensity is about that of the black and yellow's intensity is about that of the white. Thus, when the blue moves over the black grating, hardly or no motion is perceived there. And similar, when the yellow is over the white, no motion is perceived there. We think that contrast plays an important role, and events are used in the processing. Thus, we can use such displays to study the role of events in motion perception. To begin with, we created a variation of the stepping feet illusion. As you see, when the contrast in the grating decreases, the illusion also is weakened. And as the contrast again increases, we see the clear stepping effect. In this illusion, it's not just the image motion, but it's also the segmentation that needs to be modeled. We have created a GitHub site with data and code for flow estimation using classical and neural network approaches, as well as data code to create displays and simulate events.
Hi everyone, my name is Levi Berner. I am a PhD student at the University of Maryland, and I am helping to organize the Motion Illusions workshop. I'm quickly going to take you through the code that we have developed for this workshop. It is organized into two parts. The first part I have pulled up here is the Motion Illusions Python package, which in a second I will demonstrate some of its functionality. And the second is the Stepping Feet Illusion branch, which contains some MATLAB scripts and videos and data related to the Stepping Feet illusion. The MATLAB scripts primarily allow you to generate event data, such as you would get from a DVS stream, from a video. So here's one of the sample videos that we have provided. So here's the sample video. If you run the MATLAB code on this, you will get a nice event stream which you could put into a neural network of some kind. Next, I'm going to show you the functionality of the Motion Illusions Python package. So this package provides three main functions. It can warp an image, which is demonstrated in this script. It can translate an image, and it can graph all those things very nicely in real time. And then last, it can test the sequences generated by these image generators in an optical flow network. The optical flow network that we've selected is called Unflow. It's an open source, deep neural network optical flow estimator that was a top performer in the Kitty dataset some time ago. And we've wrapped it to make it easy to run your own images through it. Now, because that is an older neural network, it uses an older version of TensorFlow. The easiest way to get started with that is to install Docker, and you will need a graphics card. You install Docker and you run and build the Docker image that I provided. Once you have this, you can just run in. I provided a Docker run command that gives access to your display, and then you'll have a bash terminal inside the Docker image, and you'll be able to do anything you want. So let me show you how this works. So here I've cloned the Motion Illusions repository, and of course I have built the Docker image, like so. Okay, of course this is going to run very fast for me because I've already completed it. Now I can run the Docker image. Once I'm in it, you'll find that you are inside the Motion Illusions GitHub repository. I'm going to run one of the examples. So here's some of the examples. I'm going to run the rotation warp example. And what this will do is it'll continuously warp an image that is provided to it. And if asked to, it can actually save this sequence of images out. So on the first image on the left is the original image. The second is the warp one. The third image is the flow field that's been applied between the first and the second image. And finally, this fourth image down here, it just demonstrates which color corresponds to which direction. All right, so I'm going to stop that now. And as I said, you can save this off. So if I add a flag, save your test sequence, I can generate these images and they will be saved off to a directory on my file system. And here are some of the images. All right, so then I can feed this into an optical flow network. And I can do that with the test on flow network. The way we do this is we run the script. And this will fire up the OnFlow optical flow network, evaluate it on a series of images, and then allow you to see the optical flow that has been estimated frame by frame. So we quickly evaluate on 15 images. And so the first image on the left is the input image. The second is the photometric loss. And the third is the estimated optical flow. And if I hit a key, I can move between different images. All right, and of course, exit, and I can leave the Docker container and continue about my day. All right, thank you very much. I hope you enjoy, and I hope you join this workshop.